The first thing Calder Nash heard that morning was the sound of a man breathing wrong. He did not look up from the anvil. The hammer fell where it was meant to fall, and the shoe turned under his hand the way 100 others had turned that summer. The forge breathed heat across his forearms. A second hammer blow, a third. Then he set the iron down and only then turned toward the open doorway of the smithy. Wherever you are listening tonight, at the kitchen table with a cup gone cold, in your shop with the radio on, by the window with a blanket over your knees, I would like you to tell me where you're sitting when you can. The town in this story is small, and the wind is small, and the man who comes to the door is not. The old man on the threshold was leaning against the jamb the way a man leans when his legs have run out of negotiation. His pack was tall as a child and twice as wide as any sensible traveler would have allowed it to be. He had the face of a man who had been cheerful once and had got tired of it. There was hay in his beard. "I'm looking for the man who shoes horses in Pinedell," the old man said. His voice was thin as paper. "They told me in Thornburg if I followed the creek, I'd find him." Calder nodded toward the street. "You found him. My name is Obadiah Cray. I have come a long way, and I have not come without trouble." The old man did not step inside. He stood with one hand on the strap of his pack and the other pressed flat against the doorframe, as if he were a child in a doorway waiting to be invited. Calder went back to his anvil. The iron was almost the right color. He gave it 2 more strikes, slid it into the water, and the air cracked with the hiss of it. He liked a man who said what he meant. He liked less a man whose pack was bigger than his sense. "There is a man here," Obadiah said when the steam had cleared. "His name is Mercer Coldwell. You will know him. He is the largest man in town, and he owns most of what is not." Calder had met Coldwell exactly twice. Once in the feed store, once at the hitching post. Coldwell had not spoken either time. He had only looked. His look was the kind that made other men remember where they had put their wallets. "He believes I have something of his," Obadiah said. "I do not. But he is the sort of man who takes a thing and explains it afterward." "What is it he thinks you have?" The old man drew a breath through his teeth. "A deed to a piece of land south of the river. My daughter Ruth is widowed. Her husband left her 4 acres, a cabin, and $1,000 in debt that he never earned. Coldwell intends to take all 3. I am carrying the deed home to her, and the dollars he says she owes. They are not his dollars. They are hers. Paid clean and paid twice." Outside, a board creaked on the layover stable next door. Calder set his hammer down for the second time that morning. "You have come into a town," Calder said, "where there is one lawman, and that lawman takes his breakfast in Coldwell's kitchen. I have noticed that. And you have brought, strapped to your back, the very piece of paper that man wants." "Yes. And you stopped at my shop, of all the shops in Pinedell." Obadiah's mouth made a short, unhappy line. "I stopped because you were the only one in town I judged to be straight. That is not much to go on. I know it." Calder looked past Obadiah at the bright, dry summer light of Pinedell. He could see, 2 streets over, the cold face of Coldwell's house. He could see, in his mind's eye, the small adobe of Ada Linnet, who had been feeding him suppers for 6 months because she said he worked too hard to feed himself. He thought about his forge, his tools, the leather apron he had worn through at both elbows. He thought about what a man owed a town he had come to rest in. "Sit down," he told Obadiah. He went to the mouth of the smithy and looked up and down the plank walkway. "And when I go for Ada Linnet, you stay where you are, and you don't lift that pack for anybody but me." Obadiah sat. He sat the way a man sits when the only thing he has left to do is sit. Then he lifted his hand off the strap of his pack and crossed it over his chest and said, "I am 67 years old. I have walked 340 miles. I will be here when you get back, if God is willing." It was Ada Linnet who opened her own door to his knock, and who understood in 2 words what he had come to ask. She was a tall woman, 53, with her late husband's hammer callus still on her right hand, and she had been running the soda and laundry 2 doors down since her husband fell off a wagon in the autumn of '76. She crossed both hands in front of her apron and looked at Calder very steadily. If I take him in tonight, she said, Coldwell will know by morning. I know. And Galen Drury will say he never saw who came and went. I know. Then you are not asking me for permission, she said. You are telling me what is going to happen. Yes. She nodded once. Then she took the big iron spoon off the door peg and went inside to put a second cut of pork in the pot. The walk back to the smithy felt longer than the walk away had been. The street was almost empty. A boy with a stick was chasing a chicken near the post office. A dog was sleeping in the dust beside the saloon. From the porch of the courthouse, Galen Drury lifted his hat to Calder with the slow, polite motion of a man who had been told what to lift his hat at, and Calder lifted his hat back. There was no friendliness in either motion. There did not need to be. He was inside the smithy with Obadiah, and the door was shut and the bellows were quiet, and the bag was resting against the wall behind the water trough, and Obadiah was looking at it as though it was a sick grandchild. I am going to ask you something, Calder said, and I want you to answer me slowly. I am listening. If Coldwell's men come before sunrise, and they come for you, what would you have me do with that bag? Obadiah looked at the bag. He looked at the door. He looked back at the bag. Hide it, he said. Sir, hide my bag. Hide it under the floor in the ash. I do not care where. Hide it and let them have me. I am not worth a piece of paper. Calder did not answer for what felt to Obadiah like a long time. The forge ticked as it cooled. A swallow came back through the doorway and perched on the lip of the anvil, unafraid, like a thing that knew who belonged. No, Calder said. I will not hide it. I will stand. And I will stand because if a man in Pinedell cannot stand between an old traveler and a hoodlum with a bigger hat than his hat, then Pinedell is not the town I left Texas to come and rest in. Obadiah's eyes filled, but he did not look away. That was the morning of the day Calder Nash's life broke open, and he did not yet know how far open it would go. The afternoon did not feel like an afternoon. Calder shod 2 horses that day for men whose names he knew and whose faces, when he looked up from the anvil, he tried to read. A young couple from up the basin brought a draft mule in for a reset, and the young man, whose name was Britt Yarger, lingered at the doorway after paying. My wife heard the old peddler came in last night, Britt said. He would not look at the bag. She says tell him welcome. He did not wait to be thanked. He took his wife's arm and was gone. Calder went on hammering. The iron was good iron that day, and he was glad of it. By the time the sun was down to the tops of the livery oaks, Ada Linnet had come across the street with a folded parcel under her arm. She set the parcel on the workbench and unwrapped it without speaking. Inside were 3 things. A folded letter addressed in careful hand to a Mr. Marsh Treadway, U.S. District Attorney, District of Utah, Salt Lake City. A second letter addressed to a Mrs. Ruth Cray, in care of the postmaster at Elmdale. A pouch of 11 silver dollars, the same dollars Cal had saved since spring. I wrote the first letter at the end of April, Calder said. I could not send it. I didn't know who would carry it without telling Coldwell. I will send it, Ada said. I have a cousin in Salt Lake City. He works at the stage office. He doesn't like Coldwell. Nobody in Salt Lake City likes Coldwell. And Ruth Cray? I will keep her letter until the road is safe. I will carry it to Elmdale myself when this is over. How much did the dollars cost you? Enough that I will have to take in sewing for a month. She did not smile. I will not starve. Calder nodded. He was a man of few nods, and he meant every one. The purse of dollars was to be the proof, if proof was needed, that the debt Mercer Coldwell claimed on Ruth Cray's land was bogus. Obadiah carried the original receipts in the inside pocket of his coat, and the receipts would show that the money Ruth's husband had borrowed had been paid back twice over, and that the signature on the second receipt had been forged by Coldwell's own clerk, a clerk who had, by a separate chance, become too drunk one Saturday in November and confessed it in Maeve Krantz's laundry and been carried home and remembered. There was, in short, a paper trail. Calder had spent 4 months assembling it, in the hours after his anvil work, in the back room of the smithy, by candlelight. He had not known what the paper trail was for until that morning. He had only known that a man does not always get a warning before he is needed, and that some men he would, once, have called friends. Now the smithy was quiet. Calder ate a wedge of bread and a heel of cheese standing up. Obadiah slept on the cot in the back, with his hat over his face. Ada went home by the alley, not the street. The town was settling. At 8:30, a knock came at the smithy door. It was a single knock, not a hard one. Calder opened the door halfway and found himself looking at a man whose name he knew but whose face he had never seen this close. Lindhove, Coldwell's hired man. 6'3", lean as a fence post, with a black brim pulled low and a slow way of holding his shoulders as if no wind had ever quite suited him. "Good evening," Lind said. "Good evening. Mr. Coldwell would like a word with you tomorrow, when you have a minute." "About what?" "About a traveler that may have come in from the south last night." Calder did not move. "Tell Mr. Coldwell I'll be in my shop all day. He knows where it is." "I think he wanted you to come up to the house." "I think I'd rather be in my shop." Lind did not move either. He stood with one thumb hooked in his belt and his weight settled in a way that didn't make sense for a man who had just come to deliver a message. Calmly, the way a man is calm only when he knows his hands are pieces on a board, he said, "It's not a request, Nash." "No," Calder said. "It's a threat. And a poor one." He closed the door. He shut the latch. He dropped the bar. He went to the back room and wakened Obadiah gently and told him to put his coat on and keep it on. He told him there was a man at the door he did not like the smell of. He told him to keep the bag close and to stay close to the wall. "Sir," Obadiah said, sitting up, "if they come in the night, hide my bag. Hide it under the floor. I will go out to them. I am an old man. They will not shoot an old man for a piece of paper." "No," Calder said. "We are both going to be here in the morning, and both of us going to be in plain sight of them. We're going to be here because that's what standing looks like, and it isn't graceful, but it's the only kind of grace that holds." He took up the hammer from the bench. He held it loosely. He did not pretend it was anything but what it was. A tool, not a weapon, in the hand of a man who had spent 12 years shoeing horses and not swinging at men. The forge had gone cold by then. The water in the trough had stopped hissing. Through the plank walls of the smithy you could hear, just barely, the town's evening sounds. A mother calling a child, a door slammed at the saloon, the far-off complaint of a horse that had been worked too hard that day and wanted its stall. He set the hammer down. He pulled up a bucket and sat on it, the way a man sits when he has decided he is going to wait. Obadiah sat on the cot. They did not speak. They listened. A farrier's trade is to stand in the heat long enough to do the work. There is no other way, and no shortcut is ever going to be one. It was a long night. It was the longest night of Calder's life since a night in Texas 11 years before, when he had been a different man with a different job and had walked away from something he had not, in the end, been able to walk away from. What would you have done in his place? The morning came, slow, the way mornings come in a town in which nothing has been decided yet. Mid-morning came in flat. Calder was at his anvil when he heard the boot on the plank walkway. He did not look up right away. He finished the set he was on, set the shoe by the lip of the water, and then lifted his eyes. Mercer Coldwell walked into the smithy the way a man walks into a room he owns. He was 6'1" and heavier than he looked, and the suit he wore on a workday was not a working man's suit, and the boots were Spanish and his hat was black, and his face was a particular shape of not quite still that you only see in people who have not been refused often. Behind him, taller, came Lindhove, with a rifle in both hands held low against his thigh. Behind Lind, at a step, came Drogo Merritt, a young man with a club hung off his wrist by a leather loop. "Good morning, Nash," Mercer said. "Good morning. Where is the bag?" "Behind me." "Hand it over." "No." Something, not a word, not a look, but a change in the air happened between them. Mercer walked one step closer. He did not walk past the anvil. He knew where he was. He knew what an anvil is for in the hands of a man who means it. "Hand it over," he said, "and I will not come back to your shop." "No. You are aware," Mercer said, "that I am not accustomed to being refused. I am aware. And you are aware that Drury is my cousin. I am aware. And you are aware that there is no one in Pinedell who will stand for you." Calder said nothing. Behind him, Obadiah sat on the cot and was so still that a man who had not been looking would have thought him dead. Mercer's right hand came out of his pocket. It was holding a colt. He held it the way a man holds a thing he has held so many times that his hand is the holster. "I will count to 3, he said. "Count," Calder said. 1. The forge was cooling. Calder's hammer was in his right hand, loosely. Just a hammer. "What did you do with the old woman's dollars, Mercer?" Calder said. "The dollars she paid twice for her husband's land." Not a flinch exactly. A stillness. The kind of stillness that comes to a man when a thing he had thought buried has just been spoken aloud. 2, Mercer said. "Dollars," Calder said. "That you took from a man's widow and kept in your safe with his name on the envelope. I have seen the envelope. I have copies." The air inside the smithy did not move. 3, Mercer said. He fired. He did not point the colt at Calder. He pointed it at the water trough. The water jumped. The trough cracked. There was a hole in the side of the trough, and Calder still had his hammer in his hand. Behind Mercer, on the walkway, Drogo Merritt's hand came off his club and went back to his hip. Calder did not move. He knew the kind of man who never fires at a man when there is something louder to fire at. He said coldly, "I wrote to the district attorney at the end of April, Mercer. The letter left Pinedell last week in the keeping of a woman who will not be bought. It speaks of every forged receipt, every dollar stolen from every widow in this valley, with names, including yours, including Galen's." Mercer's face went white the way a man's face goes white when something he had believed buried has, against every reasonable expectation, come up out of the ground. He did not lower the colt. "You are a dead man, Nash," he said very quietly. He lowered the colt. He put it back in his belt. He turned his shoulder to Calder and walked out the door. Drogo Merritt followed him. The boy did not look back, which was the look of a boy who meant to keep walking. Lindhove stood where he had been standing. The rifle was still in his hand. After a moment, without raising it, he said, "Did you mean that letter, Nash? Is there a letter?" "Yes," Calder said. "There is a letter." Lind nodded. The brim of his hat hid his eyes. "I will remember that you said yes." He walked out of the smithy with his rifle in both hands and the brim of his hat low over his face, and did not come back that day. The forge was cold. The water in the trough was still moving from the bullet hole, but slowly. Calder put his hammer down on the anvil with the very careful motion of a man who was not yet sure his hands would be where he asked them to be. Obadiah, on the cot, let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like a long time. From her window, across the street, Ada Linnet let her hand drop off the hammer butt of her husband's rifle. Calder sat down on his bucket, and he did not feel his legs, and he did not feel his face, and he did not feel his hands hold still. He thought about the night in Texas. He thought about the night in Texas again. He thought about how a man can be ashamed of a thing for 11 years, and how a thing you are ashamed of can be the very thing you are going to need. "Mr. Nash," Obadiah said, "I am very tired." "I know," Calder said. "I am going to pour you a cup of coffee, and you are going to drink it, and we are going to get into a wagon tonight before he can send anyone else, and Ada is going to drive you south and drop you at the trail to Elmdale. And in the morning I will still be here." "And what will you do in the morning, sir?" Calder said nothing for a long time. "In the morning," he said, "I will be at my anvil." Ada drove Obadiah south in the dark. Calder sat by the dead forge and listened to the wagon leave, and he did not cut a piece of wood, and he did not sweep his floor, and he did not make himself a cup of coffee. He sat on his bucket with the hammer across his knees, and he listened to the town go to sleep around the smithy. The mama calling the child, the saloon door, the horse, the wind through the livery oaks. He went to bed. He dreamed of nothing he could remember in the morning. He woke at 4. He went out to the trough. The trough had a crack the length of his forearm from the bullet, and the water had drained out of it overnight and left a dark stain on the floor. He took the trough apart in the dark, with a wrench and a quiet word, and he made a cleat. He forged it in the new fire he had built. He burned the heel of his left hand on the second strike. He stood with his hand in the water bucket and watched the skin turn white. He did not curse. He did not call for Ada. He wrote a second letter to a Mr. Justice Weld at the county seat, and he wrote it slowly because the pen was not the hammer and the ink was not the iron, and he had to think about each word the way he had to think about each strike of the shoe. He wrote what he had held in his head for 4 months. He wrote every forged receipt, every widow, every dollar, with names and dates and copies of the receipts Obadiah had carried. He sealed the letter. He crossed it twice in the wax. He waited for daylight. Britt Yarger was leaving that morning for Salt Lake, with the reset draft mule in the second wagon. Calder met him at the livery and gave him the letter. "If I am a dead man by Tuesday," Calder said, "you send it. If I am not a dead man by Tuesday, you send it anyway." Britt said, "I will send it." Ada came back at first light. She came alone. She had a small bundle under her apron and her husband's rifle broken across her knee. She set the bundle on the bench. Inside was a clean white cloth, a tin of lard, and a length of bandage. "Don't say a word," she said. "Give me your hand." She dressed the burn without speaking. She was very thorough. She tied off the bandage with the small efficient nod of a woman who had been doing this work a long time. She put his hand back in his lap and sat across from him on a nail keg. "Obadiah is on the road," she said. "He has the deed. He has the receipts. He is, God willing, in Elmdale by Tuesday. His dollars. I sent them ahead by Wells Fargo. They will be in the Elmdale Bank for Ruth by Wednesday. And the bag. The bag is with me. At home." She took out, from under her apron, 11 silver dollars in a small muslin pouch. She had taken them out, counted them, and put them back. She set them on the bench. "I did not earn these," she said. "I want you to keep them. They will pay for the trough and the cleat and a new anvil hammer if the one you have gives out on you in the next year." He pushed them back across the bench. "Keep them for Ruth. Ruth doesn't need them. Keep them for the next one. There's always a next one in this country." She looked at him. She looked at the hand he couldn't quite close. She looked at the pouch of dollars. She put the pouch in her apron pocket and did not argue a second time. There was nothing to argue. The two of them had been, without ever saying so, a kind of pair, and they both knew it. "I will not write a letter about what you did for me," she said. "Some debts are just money. The debt I'm figuring is different. And I will figure it in my own way, in my own time." She sat a long moment with his hand in hers, and his hand did not move, and her hand did not move. Then she stood up. She took the rifle home. She left the door open so he could hear the town. He sat on his bucket and listened to the town wake up. A dog barked in the alley. The baker boy opened the bakery door. A cow was being led to water behind the post office. He thought about the letter. He thought about Britt Yarger on the road to Salt Lake. He thought about Obadiah on the road to Elmdale. He thought about the bucket he had been sitting on and the anvil he had been standing at and the iron he had been bending, all the springs and summers since he had come to Pinedell. He thought about the trough cleat he had forged with his burned hand. He thought about the crooked thing in his chest that had been, since the morning Obadiah Cray had come to his door, replaced with a different crooked thing which was also quiet and was also unsatisfied and which was also the most like a right thing he had felt in 11 years. He did not know yet whether Mercer Coldwell would come back that day. He did not need to know. He was, for the first time in 11 years, not waiting on a man to come and destroy what he had built in order to feel what he had been carrying. The bell on the bakery door rang, and he remembered that he had not eaten since yesterday. The bell on the bakery door rang again. He sat a moment more. He let himself sit it. If this story has found you in a quiet way tonight, then I would like to ask, with no rush and no pressure, that you leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't, so the next story finds you too. The days that followed were the longest days of fall. Britt Yarger mailed the letter from Salt Lake on the Tuesday after. On the Friday, a deputy from the U.S. Marshal's office arrived on the northbound stage and went up the street to the courthouse. He was a lean, polite man whose name was Ezra Pauley. He wore no badge on his coat. He had with him a ledger he had brought down from the district attorney's office. He read the ledger in the marshal's parlor from noon until 3:30, and he asked Galen Drury a great many questions. Galen Drury gave him a great many answers, all of them small. On Saturday morning, Ezra Pauley walked up the hill to Coldwell's ranch in a soft hat and a dark suit. He handed Mercer Coldwell, in front of his foreman and his clerk and the cook who had been with him 19 years, a paper that was a summons to appear before the district court at Salt Lake City on the 15th of October, on charges of forgery, fraudulent conversion, and conspiracy to deprive a federal pensioner of her lawful property. Mercer Coldwell did not say a word. He read the paper. He handed it back. He asked for a glass of water, and the cook brought it, and he drank it, and he walked into his own office and closed the door. In the parlor, his clerk, whose name was Howie Bream, looked at his hands and said nothing. Howie Bream had, the November before, confessed in Maeve Krantz's laundry that he had forged the second receipt on the Cray mortgage. Maeve had remembered. Maeve had, that morning, sent a letter to Ezra Pauley in 3 pages of longhand, in the back of her laundry, while she was wringing sheets. Ezra Pauley had the letter in his ledger. On Monday, Pauley called on Howie Bream at his boarding house. They talked for an hour. Bream cried. He said it had been Coldwell's idea. He said Coldwell had paid him $200 per forgery. He said he was sorry. He said he would testify. Pauley wrote it down. Coldwell sold the ranch in October. He left Pinedell in November. He went south. He was not heard from again in that country. Galen Drury resigned on the Tuesday after. He had not stolen anything. He had only looked the other way when the man who set his plate had stolen. That was enough. A new marshal came down from the county seat in December. His name was Aubrey Vint, and he had the face of a man who has been asked a question and decided to give an honest answer. In December, a letter came from Elmdale. It came in a plain envelope, addressed in the same careful hand that had written on the deed, and it sat on Calder's bench until he had finished shoeing a sorrel mare that belonged to the schoolteacher. Dear Mr. Nash, the letter said, my daughter Ruth has received her deed back, and the dollars, which arrived at the bank in Elmdale on the 7th of November. She has begun to plant a winter garden behind the cabin. Her name, today, is the only name on the title to that land. She sends her thanks. She says she does not know how to write thanks well, but she is trying. I send my thanks. I am in your debt, though I do not think you would permit me to say it. I wish you good winters. Obadiah Cray. Calder folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the rest of his correspondence. He did not write back. He did not need to write back. He went on with his work. The winter passed. The spring came. The customers came back to the smithy in greater numbers than they had come the spring before, because a man whose forge had held against Mercer Coldwell was, by the quiet agreement of Pinedell, the kind of man whose horses you could trust. A boy, no older than 9, came on a Saturday to watch Calder shoe a horse. He stood in the doorway and watched the whole job. When Calder set the shoe, the boy said, "Are you the fellow who fought Coldwell?" Calder did not look up. "I am the fellow who shoes horses." The boy nodded his head, as though that had been the right answer. He went away. One morning in early May, Calder was at his anvil, and Ada Linnet was sweeping her front step across the street, and the Swallow was back again in the same spot on the inside of the smithy door. Lottie Pinkney came in with her daughter's pony for a reset. The forge breathed heat across his forearms, the way it always did. There was no placard in his window. There was no lecture. There was nothing for a man walking past to read. There was only the sound of a hammer at a steady pace, a swallow carrying mud in its beak, and a sweep broom across the sidewalk. The town walked past as though nothing had been broken. But Pinedell for once walked past thinking, tomorrow night, a new story begins, about a woman who came back from the dead and a husband who had to decide whether to believe. Sit with me again. Sleep well.